Hi. Matthias stood on the street corner in a moment of peace as the city's chaos surmounted all those caught up in it. The traffic flew past him with a whoosh and a roar as if it were wild predators chasing down its prey. He looked for anyone around him to see if they noticed that he was peacefully still. There were none. Those that sat in the cars on the stop-side street were eager to join the hunt of prey, or they were flipping through the endless scrolls on their phones. Matthias wondered what this kind of being meant for all of those lost in this madness. Why could they not forgo or forget about any of this for just a short while and sit with God in silence, he thought. The light changed and the side street traffic zoomed off quickly as their vehicles could take them, leaving a dust and a cloud of exhaust which burned Matthias's nose. His attention was grabbed by a dove that flew over his head and landed on a ledge of the building on the corner of where he stood. The dove was set apart from all of this activity, and Matthias had found one that was as himself. "Hello, friend of God," he said quietly to the bird. "Hey, man, you got some change so I could get some food?" Matthias's attention returned to the street as his eyes met a man that was addressing him. "I do not," he returned to his visitor. "How about a cigarette?" the man asked with his rough, scratchy tone. "I do not," Matthias returned once again. "Ah, what good are you?" the man retorted and turned and walked away. Matthias thought about that defiled rhetorical question. "What good am I?" he said aloud. A flurry of questions answered this. What good can I be? Why am I here in this collection of distractions? Where is it that I would be considered good? How does one become good? Is it by others' opinions, or my own, or the grace of God? Could anything that I do be considered good? Is good by comparison, or is it by something that can stand on its own? Without God, could there be any good? A man rushing by him shoulder-checked him back into the world. Matthias stepped aside of the constant flood of people flowing along the sidewalk to stand in between the stoplight and a metal utilities box, a niche to avoid the current from the river of bodies floating by. He studied the hard looks on some of the people's faces. Others had the look of worry as they rushed to and from the events that filled their lives. Matthias wondered if there was some way to get their attention, to slow the aging that troubled their souls from the cares of this way of life. His eyes caught those of a small child that was being dragged along by his mother. The boy was like a weight that slowed his mother's progress of chores. His mother's face had worry, contempt, and impatience on it, which she cleverly tried to hide with makeup. The boy and Matthias shared a moment together. The rest of the world disappeared in their soul-gazing. The boy smiled at this event. He had not seen such a look from any man before, not from his dad, not from his teachers, or even his mother. The child was pulled past where Matthias stood and disappeared into the crowd. Matthias had found another one that knew different than all of those that he had studied this day right here in this city. He knew that soon the boy would also be as the others one day. Matthias prayed to God in his spirit. Matthias began to sing, at first in his spirit, then quietly on his lips. As the Spirit of God filled him through his praise, the words became louder. His vocal cords resounded, and the bass of his voice boomed along with all of the other notes of his tone. The traffic sounds began to fade away. Those that focused on their toil began to look up, for they haven't heard or seen such a sight before. Matthias kept singing each verse, overpowering the last with the intensity of praise and worship. Some people stopped and stood to listen. Others, in the flow, fixed their eyes on him as they passed on in astonishment. A crowd began to surround that street corner, with Matthias being the center of it. His focus was on God through praise. Some heard his words of praise, while others just heard the melody. Both were soothed by Matthias's worship of God. An old lady that pushed her way through the circle around Matthias came forth singing as well. Two were now gathered in worship. Peace, like a wave, washed over the crowd. This caused some to back away and return to their hard stares and their rushing to get through the lives that they have chosen or were chosen for them by not choosing for themselves. Matthias and his choir of one continued on, increasing the joy of themselves and those willing to receive it. Some people began to sway back and forth with big smiles on their faces, losing the care for the race that they had had just moments ago. The chorus came around again, and many started to join in the singing. Softly at first, then boldly as they noticed others doing the same. There was a ring of spectators watching, and some of them recorded the event with their phones. The light changed, and the traffic stayed to watch this as the horns of those behind, out of sight of this wondrous event, blared. This did not deter Matthias or the old woman, and those now in the throng of heavenly singers of God's peace. The worship song continued on. The voices of the people grew until the final chorus was shouted in jubilation. The crowd cheered for Matthias. They shouted praises to God. They hugged one another and gave thanks to have shared such an amazing, once-in-a-lifetime event. The crowd dissipated and returned to the toils of their city lives. All that were left was the old woman and Matthias. "Young man," she said, looking up into his eyes, "thank you for reminding me how it once was for me when I was younger, when life was slower, and when people took time to give thanks to God for what they have instead of racing to get what they think they need or whatever they were told that they want." The old woman took Matthias's hand and gently kissed it. She then bowed her head in respect as she walked away like a young lady that had restored her faith in God. Matthias stood there as the world fell back into chaos. He waited until he was unnoticed by all. He bowed his head and prayed again. Then a ray of golden light came from the sky and received Matthias up into his heavenly home. Only a few saw a flash of light, which caught their attention briefly as they rushed to and fro back into their cares of the world. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope you liked it. Shalom.